Europeans did. And people write history and they try to apply today's concepts and morals on yesterday's actions and activities, and that's not fair, and that's easily not fair. But there's something that goes so far as almost to be an apologist that happens when historians try to be apologists for what happened before. And so I'm going to read you a little bit about this log that I've been reading all year, and there's some pretty important ideas in it that have to do with conquering people, and not really doing it for a bad reason, but for a good reason. And so we have, just before the voyage, we have a discussion that I'm not finding right this minute, and I didn't mark it very well. And so I'm going to ad-lib it for you, and that is that Columbus was not Spanish. He was an Italian, but he was flying a Spanish flag, and he came in order to discover what he already believed was there, and that is a passage to the Far East by going west. And so when he found these people, he really was thinking he was finding Indies. That's how the name came, from the Indies. They thought he was finding the East Indies. Instead, he found this whole new continent. And Columbus, when he got here, shows that he was really the first ethnographer in the New World, and his commentary on the Taino people, who he first called Lucian, is of indispensable value to the modern anthropologist. Though deficient in some respects, Columbus failed to discern their religious culture. We've had readings about that all the time. He said they have no religion, whereas we've been reading about their religion in other matters. His remarks afforded the only good overview of these island people before they vanished from the earth. The most advanced concept he offered is that of cultural region unified by language and customs. As he approached the eastern part of now what's Dominican Republic, he became increasingly aware of the Caribs, of whom he had heard reports, and as the language began to shift, he attributed this to distance from their cultural hearth. Also, when encountering the rather warlike and unattractive Siguayo people, the admiral said, "If they are not Caribs, they must be of lands fronting them." Here is a distinct recognition of cultural transition zone. The cultural unity of the Taino greatly impressed Columbus. He commented on this harmony over and over. We cannot fault him for reviewing these people as ripe for Christianity. For a devout person as Columbus was, such missionary zeal was a way of assuring entry into heaven and of bringing about spiritual equality on earth. Those who see Columbus as the founder of slavery in the New World are grossly in error. See, this is the apologetic historian who says, even though all of the slavery came down from as a consequence, Columbus wasn't really responsible. That's not what he was about. And he says people misinterpret the statement made by Columbus on the first day in America when he said that they, the Indians, ought to be good servants. In fact, Columbus offered this observation in explanation of an earlier comment he had made, theorizing that people from the mainland came to the islands to capture these Indians as slaves because they were so docile and obliging. And so in the log, he expresses love and admiration for the Indians. His affection for the young chief is one of the most touching stories of love, trust, and understanding between men of different races and cultures to come out of this period in history. Of course, when he's making this comment, he doesn't talk really about how the fact that he's taken people aboard against their will and doesn't want them to escape. I mean, he's got people who are captive who he doesn't want to escape. Is that what you do to someone you love? I don't know. Some people have that concept, I guess. But Columbus displayed affection for his crew, and he was a tolerant captain who did everything in his power to maintain their morale. He even lied to them to maintain their morale. I mean, so got to be careful about history, even history that's put together in a scholarly way. It passes judgment. He passes judgment that Columbus was cool, was a genius, was good, and so he tries to judge back in those days. Well, maybe you should and maybe you shouldn't judge back in those days. I've got an email. A listener emailed to us, and he's got a question. Who appoints the City Code Enforcement Board? He was condemned for parking in a handicapped parking spot even when he brought to court his handicapped placard. Another man got a ticket for parking in a police parking spot. He had pictures showing that he parked beside the police parking lot. The board ruled guilty. Well, the city council appoints the code enforcement board. They serve at the pleasure of the people who appoint them, and they try to do a good job. I can tell you that my experience in front of the code enforcement board for the city of Punta Gorda has not always been good. It hasn't always been bad, but they don't have a good concept of the judge that they're supposed to be, and they are more like another brick in the wall for enforcement. Unfortunate that that's the way the presumptions generally go, and so that's why we have to have presumptions of innocence and due process, because most everybody who applies it really is being pulled by other things, and so you've got to make these rules that have this concept of presumptions of innocence and that you're entitled to have evidence considered and such as that. City of Punta Gorda appoints them. I'm coming off of Columbus here just a minute. I don't mean to condemn the historian so gravely. It's just when you see the process continue, and for us, those of us who are the beneficiaries of the European Western expansion into this continent and the systematic, continuous destruction of the culture that we found here, and the indigenous peoples driving them and stealing from them and then condemning them for fighting back, that it's easy for us to say, well, that was then and this is now, and get over it. Well, the ones who suffered have a longer memory of their history than those who are successful. And the history gets written to point out the good parts of the successful as opposed to the good parts of the banished. And so always be careful with the history. Who's writing for what purpose? Is it for the benefit of truth, or is it for the benefit of the successful side? And I think you know what I think about that. You have to take that broader approach.